Are you ready for an unnecessarily deep dive into hairstyles and headwear for a relatively short period of time in Europe and North America? Hello and welcome, I'm Dixie, and in my last video I shared this 1840s ball gown that I created, and in this video I am going to talk about how I made the little headpiece to match my dress. If you would like to skip ahead and just watch the actual tutorial part, you can go here. But if you'd like to learn about the history of fashionable hair in the early Victorian period, then stick around. When we look at 1840s fashion, we have to acknowledge Queen Victoria's influence as a fashion icon. Her style preferences were more subdued than the over-the-top fashions of the 1830s with their huge sleeves, lots of trim and accessories, and crazy, crazy hair. The high fashion look for hair at the time was tight ringlets up near the forehead with the rest of the hair pulled high into elaborate Apollo knots, or weird buns in the shape of bows and loops. Like most trends in fashion or music or art or even politics, the key points of the 1840s style were a direct reaction to the styles immediately preceding it. The extreme 30s fashion reached a peak in about 1837, the same year that Victoria became queen, and soon everything starts to deflate. By the time 1840 rolls around, we see slimmed down sleeves, hemlines and waistlines are lowered, trimming is much more subdued, at least in the surviving garments. Fashion plates are still a little extravagant. What does stick around are big poofy skirts held out by several layers of petticoats and wide necklines in evening wear. In hairstyles, those wild Apollo knots disappear and the bun slides down the back of the head. At first it's still pretty high, but in the 50s it practically hits at the base of the neck. And those face framing curls also fall further down the side of the face. In some photographs, we see these curls are pretty long and extend well past the chin. But the curls seem to be falling out of fashion and tend to be worn for evening wear or special occasions or reserved for younger women and girls. If a woman doesn't have curls, her hair at either side of her head tends to be brushed down and back where the ends meet the bun. This hair often covers the ears either partially or fully. If it doesn't, the hair is usually twisted or braided, then looped down and back. So the 1840s and into the 1850s are one of the easiest periods if you want to recreate a historical hairstyle. You can go really fancy with braids and curls, but for the most part, if you have medium length to long hair with no bangs, you can make a basic style that consists of a center part, a bun at the back of the head, and side hair panels that swoop down the face and toward the back of the head. There's no volume, you don't necessarily need a bunch of hair pieces or hair rats or pillows like in the 18th century or the Edwardian period, and you don't even need to curl your hair. If you do have curly hair, you can either straighten it or just smooth it out and smoosh it down so it makes the basic fashionable shape. You'll often see pictures of a kind of dog-eared style where the hair sticks out really far at the sides. I mean, it's a look. And it's literally super easy to achieve this hairstyle because you just take the hair at the side of your head and flip it up and back, and it naturally makes that shape. If you don't want that look, you can give your hair a twist and pull it back so it won't stick out as far. Bonnet shapes evolved along with hair, with the crown of the bonnet starting to fall down into the back of the head, following the migration of the bun, and the broad, round brims squeezed down until they framed the face and often obscured a woman's view. I think these narrow bonnets may have also contributed to the loss of the ringlets in daytime because the curls are just packed into this small space between your face and the bonnet. The bonnet brims end up making a kind of cone shape from the round crown in the back to the face, giving them that coal shuttle nickname. Older women still wear caps, and women likely still wore caps at home, but it seems during the day caps that cover the whole head are replaced by smaller, frillier things that either cover the back of the bun or the top of the head, but not the front, or they're just layers of lace and frills that sit on top, leaving the bun exposed, and have lappets hanging on either side. These lappets get longer and longer into the 50s and 60s. You could also have evening lappet caps adorned with flowers and ribbon and extra frilly lace. For fancier headwear, we see a few trends left over from previous decades. Turbans had been in fashion in one way or another since the 1790s, but they seem to be waning in the 1840s. I don't see many of them in pleats from the 50s and 60s. Another way to dress up your hair for evening was with flowers, ribbons, beads, and more attached to a headband. These really popped up in the 40s, and I've heard them called falls, probably because earlier versions had decorations hanging on either side of the head. These were typically worn for the fanciest of events like balls or weddings, and it's a great way to zhuzh up an otherwise simple hairstyle. A lot of these extant examples can be hard to date, but generally the fancier they are and the more they have height at the top of the head, the later they tend to be. Some of these came in matching sets with brooches you could attach to your gown. And this brings me to my Victorian headpiece project. My hair was too long to do those ringlet curls, although now I cut my hair and it's shorter and I could probably do it. So I knew I was going to go with a more plain hairstyle, and I wanted to dress it up with something fancy. I was inspired by the Pragmatic Costumers tutorial for falls on her blog, which I will link in the description. To make this headpiece or falls or crown, you will need a thin metal headband that you can buy at any craft store. For decoration, I'm using flowers, and since this is going to be right up next to my face, I wanted to avoid those plasticky faux flowers and went with some velvety paper ones instead. And this vintage ribbon is left over from my dress, so it matches perfectly. You'll need cutting tools, scissors for fabric or ribbon, snips for the flowers, and wire. You'll also need a means of attaching your decorations like needle and thread if you're working with ribbon. Floral tape would have been useful, but I don't have any, so I'm using some thin wire. And in an emergency, I have a glue gun on standby. No, it's not historically accurate, but if accuracy is something that matters to you, you could always go out and boil a horse. And something not pictured here, but I found really helpful were wonder clips, but any kind of clip like a binder clip would work. To start, I clipped my individual stems off and divided them to go on either side of my head. Make sure you keep a few inches of stem on each individual flower because you'll need that to secure it to the headband. I'm wrapping the stems with wire. Tape would have been more secure, but the wire allows me to shift the position of the flowers up or down the headband. Then I wrapped the exposed metal part of the headband with ribbon. But after an initial try-on, I decided the flowers were too high on the head, so I removed all the ribbon, readjusted the flowers, and put the ribbon back on. Next, I knew I wanted to add some ribbon loops to either side, and this is where the needle and thread come in. I'm gathering the ribbon by sewing a running stitch and then tacking things down with a few stitches. And then I'm just making more and more loops. So if you get to this point and worry your headband is starting to look like dog ears, keep going, because that's what you want. It's okay if things don't look symmetrical. They're not necessarily symmetrical in extant examples either. Lastly, I've left some of the tails of the ribbon hanging, and again, I'm not really worried about them being the same length on either side. And we're all done. I put the headband on after I'd finished my little hairstyle, and the little bit of exposed metal on the bottom ends gets hidden in my hair. Thanks for joining me on this little mini historical sewing adventure. I hope you learned something new and were inspired to make something pretty for yourself. The 1840s are an often overlooked period of fashion history, but the more I dig into it, the more I appreciate what makes this era special. See you all next time for more Victorian sewing projects.